Well, hello and welcome to the IDM Masters interview series where we speak with industry experts to help you, the listener, gain insight about the best tools and practices from people on the front lines to help you secure your enterprise. On today's show, we have Ryan Newington, who is by day the Capability Manager of Identity and Device Solutions at Monash University. And by night, he's also the developer of the popular LiftNet PowerShell tools from MIM 2016 as well as FIM 2010. So Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Scott. Thanks for having me.
So where are you joining us from today?
From Melbourne, Australia. Very cold
Okay.
winter's morning here.
That's right. You know, everyone always thinks that Australia is one of those endless summer countries, but you forget that you've got regular seasons just like the rest of the world. So don't really hear about a lot of snow in
Absolutely.
Australia though. So
Yeah, it's Melbourne gets the extremes, so we get the very very cold winters, but we also get blistering hot summers as well.
have you always lived there, or are you from a different part of Australia?
No, I was born and raised in Melbourne, so I've been here for all my life. I do enjoy it. It's a lovely city. Just some weather challenges, that's all.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, there are probably worse places to live than Australia. So,
That's true. Antarctica, for example.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So, uh, how did you first get started in the technology industry, and how, I guess, is maybe a follow-up, how did you get introduced to Microsoft Identity Manager and the FIM forerunner, if you will?
Yes, so my introduction to technology, I guess, goes back a pretty long way. My dad introduced me to programming in BASIC on the Commodore 64 when I was about 10 years old. I kept a keen interest in IT since then. When I was in high school, I was working at my local McDonald's, and for a while there, it seemed like I might end up on a very different career path. I spent
Oh my
about eight
gosh, that's
years at that
hilarious.
company. So I spent about 8 years there working my way up through management. But an IT opportunity opened up through one of my previous managers who had since left the company, and I went to work there with him, and that sort of started me off on the IT path. So um, I've been working at the university for quite some time in a few different roles. And I guess I came into FIM with some of the challenges that we needed to solve within our organisation. We have another campus in South Africa, and we needed to remove them from a legacy Novell identity system that they had there. And FIM was the product that we chose to do that. So it was just basically getting them onto AD and off Novell, but copying their identities and provisioning them out from here in Melbourne.
So talk a little bit about the cutover then, or migrating away from Novell over to FIM. What were some of the challenges that you had, I guess, from a planning and then from an implementation standpoint?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons that we chose to implement, I guess, a separate Active Directory for them was the geographical distance and the reliability of network communications. I think at the time, internet traffic sort of went up through Asia and across through Europe and then down the African continent. So latency was quite a significant concern. So things like forest replication or replicating our AD out there just didn't seem like the right way to go. Um, and they were an affiliate organisation as well, so having the ability to have them operate with their own infrastructure was pretty important. So FIM, I guess, came into it because it was able to do, adds, mods and changes, so it meant very little network traffic going back and forth, and all authentication could be resolved locally. So it was very much driven by network topology and physical geographic reasons.
Okay. And that's really interesting. So how many total identities does your FIM instance manage then? Or
So
your
we've got about 200,000 identities in total, so it's a fairly big environment. There's some tens of thousands of groups as well on top of that, obviously. But Monash is a very, very large organisation. We've got, I think, 4 campuses in Victoria, in Australia, but also presences in China, in Italy, India, South Africa. So it's a very very big organisation. We partner with a lot of other institutions as well, and in some cases we become the IT provider for them. So we manage identity and networks and those kind of things. So not only is it 200,000 identities, but lots of different cohorts of people, from staff to students to researchers and affiliates. It's a big pool of people with lots of different complex requirements as to what
Wow.
their identity actually entails.
Wow. So from just a management perspective then on kind of I guess your day-to-day perspective, how do you balance the requirements? And I'm sure the requirements between these various international campuses have got to differ significantly between, say, Italy and China and Australia. How do you manage those requirement differences between the various campuses, but still kind of maintain a stable infrastructure?
Yes, so one of the tools that I wrote and released was is called ACMA, and it's a codeless rules engine for FIM. So part of its job is to process. There's about 3,000 different rules under which attributes can change within the identity system in an automated way. So its job is to implement those and look for incoming changes and make the appropriate modifications to objects. So as objects come in and as new users, and creating all the attributes, usernames and email addresses and those sort of things. As an example, we've got, I think, 180 email domains that we manage. So our users could have one or more email addresses in one of those 180 domains. So making those sorts of decisions as to what values they get, controlling the provisioning and deprovisioning cycle. So ACMA takes care of all of that for us. So it keeps FIM able to do what I think it's fantastic at, and that's sort of moving data in and out between systems, and delegating the responsibility of creation of new information to the ACMA rules engine.
So yeah, and I saw I guess your initial demo of the ACMA rules engine at the FIM user group. That was what, a year or two ago. I'm getting so old now. Everything's starting to run together, but it was at least two
Yeah,
years ago, right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was quite some time ago.
So now, and I guess in kind of your operations then, running that rules engine, is that something that the developers tweak, or is that something that you've got, say, business analysts that are in charge of actually inputting those rules and I guess in a development environment and then walking it through QA to finally deploy? What is that process? I guess what is it? Do you have super technical folks using ACMA, or is it more just say again like a business analyst that's doing that?
Yeah, sure. So, I guess talking a little bit about the philosophy of why ACMA came about, is that in my team and in most identity teams, I think around the place, it's very focused on systems administrators and systems engineers, and I actually don't have any developers working for me at all. So the whole premise around having ACMA was to develop a component where our systems administrators and systems engineers could modify business rules without having to learn .NET code or C Sharp or whatever it may be. So the admins and engineers are responsible for the business rule changes. Sometimes we'll have a BA, depending on the complexity of the business rule change, we might have a BA document and make sure we get the details right. But for example, where those 180 email addresses that I talked about are changed fairly regularly, we might have a couple of changes to that list per month, and it's something that's very, very easy for those guys to do. The previous system we had coming from before FIM was a 30-year-old Fortran-based identity management system, and no one really knew how it worked, and
Yeah.
certainly no one knew Fortran. So we ended up developing a whole lot of scripts around the outside of the system to sort of get it to where it needed to be. But again, it was always going back to either Fortran code or Perl code, which is not something that my team had expertise in. So we wanted to avoid drawing in outside expertise for something as simple as, hey, the university wants a new email address or a change to an existing business process. So that's how that came about. So the whole thing is designed so that there's no Monash specific code anywhere in our identity system actually across all those business rules. The only code we use is generic and the stuff that I've open sourced that anyone can use, so nothing specific to the university.
Wow, that's something else. So what then are some of the main use cases handled by your MIM implementation?
Um, I think automation is probably the most important part. I mean, with those 200,000 identities,
Hmm.
provisioning and deprovisioning automatically is what's important to us. We can have 10,000 new students join the organisation within a single day, so it's important that we can get them an account as quickly as possible, and allow them particularly to self-activate those accounts, avoiding manual intervention by IT teams, setting
Sure.
passwords and things like that. So that's really one of I guess the main use case of why we have it there is so that we can very, very um, quickly, I guess, deliver a really, really fast and friendly and user experience for onboarding both staff and students in the organisation, no matter if it's 5 new starters in a day or 10,000 new starters in a day.
Right, and you may get those new 10,000 starters in a day because of new enrollment or those type of things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Start a semester at the beginning of the year is when we have our big student intake of undergraduate students. So anyway, 10,000 plus, and those numbers are growing as well. So that's sort of what we baseline our performance standards on is how do we process that one day a year, and how quickly can we process it.
And I guess the same would hold true then, I guess, for offboarding students once they, I guess once they, or do you really even offboard? If they graduate, do they then become alumni, or what's the offboarding process, if any, look like then?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of deprovisioning processes depending on who you are, but yeah, students that have graduated do get a continued use of their account as alumni, and still retain access to certain systems and services that the university offer. So we obviously transition their account into that particular state and build the appropriate authorization information so that other systems can correctly either allow them or not allow them into their system, depending on, we have a lot of licenses, particularly for research libraries and things like that might
Sure.
only be available for active students. So we need to make sure we present through Active Directory and our other systems information that says, hey, this person's an alumni. You need to make sure that you're letting them in appropriately, and they can consume that. So that's part of the identity management system's job as well, is to provide that role-based information.
Right, 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 right. Now, with those 200,000 users, employees, students, and whatnot, now is that running through a couple of management agents or one management agent? Because I've worked with some universities before, and I'm just kind of interested to hear what's your strategy around managing such a large number of identities.
Yeah. So our student management system, we have a custom connector built for that, and that's where the bulk of the identities come from. We also interface with our HR system to bring in our staff details. We pull in data from South Africa's HR system. They have their own out there as well. And one of our affiliate organisations, they have some students that we get from their student database as well. So for what we call kind of source connectors,
Hmm.
and we push that data out to our Active Directory. We use Google Apps for email, so again another connector for that, and an LDAP directory service that we use for applications as well.
So typically, how long does your synchronization cycles take for something that large? Are you just kind of running deltas during the day and then maybe once a quarter doing full syncs, or what's kind of your strategy in working in such a large environment like that?
Yeah, so daily we do, it is all deltas, obviously, with the number of identities we've got. It is absolutely imperative that we have delta support on all our connectors. So the day runs through with just deltas. Each night we do full imports on each of the connectors, just to make sure that everything's kind of in synchronization there. And we tend to do, we have a bit of a release process where we take our configuration from dev to QA to production, and we generally do a release of new features or bug fixes every 2 or 3 weeks, and on those releases we'll do we generally take the system offline, so to speak, over a weekend, and during that time we'll take an opportunity to do some full syncs there. Doing full syncs across all the connectors takes, I think, about 14 or 15 hours, so
Yeah,
it's a
I would
pretty
I would
big job.
believe that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would imagine. So in addition to maybe managing those full syncs, what are some of your other big daily challenges with such a large environment that you run into with MIM?
Yes, speed. Obviously, we've talked about that. That's the big one. We're constantly designing to make sure speed is right. But again, in such a large organisation with those 3,000 odd business rules, there are often situations where we may have missed a rule or misinterpreted a rule and pops up in edge cases. There's so many edge cases that pop up, and figuring out those and adjusting the rules appropriately. So I guess the day to day is looking for those sorts of things. We've got a bit of a built-in capability within ACMA for it to sort of alert us when something isn't quite right. So we don't spend too much time on those, and it's certainly dropped down since the go live over Easter, where we put this new system in. But that is one of the other things that we are working towards, is finding those edge cases, or perhaps where we've misinterpreted a business rule, and adjusting those. And of course, it's not just fixing it for the new accounts that are coming through, but it's going back and updating. If those, say, all 200,000 identities are impacted, we've got to go and fix those up and apply the new rules to those as well.
That would take forever. It's a long.
We've got some good tools. So we've got PowerShell for ACMA as well, which allows us to query the database and allow us to rerun certain rules and things like that. So we knew we weren't going to get it right the first time when we built it, so we made sure that the tools were there to help us. But sometimes it can be a bit of a challenge when all you see is an end state and there's an account in a really, really weird configuration, and trying to have to track back through time to work out what happened and what triggered those changes. That's probably one of the most challenging parts, is reverse engineering what has happened to an object, and particularly those changes may have come from other systems that you don't have access to, so that's always fun.
Yeah, I would imagine just chasing down data discrepancies in a system like that has got to be very challenging and sometimes really interesting, just kind of trying to do a triage to figure out how an account got into a certain state and tracing it back.
Yeah, exactly.
So with these tools that you've developed, such as ACMA and whatnot at the university, you've released the LithNet PowerShell modules for FIM. Maybe talk a little bit about that. So let's say, for instance, that I'm an IT manager, or I'm a FIM engineer listening to this interview, and I'm running a MIM 2016 or FIM 2010 instance. Why would I be interested in using a tool like the LithNet PowerShell module, or even ACMA, for instance? What are the benefits that I, as an engineer or manager, might see in my environment for using these tools?
Yeah, I guess the main one is, as I said before, is your identity management team doesn't necessarily require development expertise, so you can build up your skills in and focus on getting the business analysis right and getting the rules right. And anyone that can drive a UI can use ACMA. You don't need to know any code. It takes away, I guess, the complexities, the programming interfaces, and just lets you get on with the core identity stuff. All the tools I write are, I guess, designed to take a level of abstraction away from some of the complexity that's there, and get the complex parts out of the way, so we can get on with the job of building, I guess, quality identity management systems. I mentioned before, there's not a single line of mono-specific code in our environment. It's all abstracted away so that my team, who aren't developers, can support, maintain, and continue to enhance the IDM system without needing to know any programming.
Very cool.
Of .NET and C#, those sort of things.
Yeah, and I think that was really neat. And seeing the demo in the FIM user group meeting, just the power of that. And now on the LithNet PowerShell modules, though, I use your tools, and I have several friends that use that as well. And I think that the one thing that I've really enjoyed in using your PowerShell modules is just the simplicity of being able to, for instance, update FIM portal objects, or create, or do anything in just a fairly simple PowerShell script, whereas what I guess I would call the old shell FIM PowerShell modules were not all that intuitive. So you've done a great job in creating a very simple interface to use to be able to update portal data, and even with the synchronization tools that you've released, being able to get into the sync engine and query and, do a lot of different things in there that you wouldn't necessarily be able to, I wouldn't say easily do with the out of the box Microsoft PowerShell tools.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of them, I think. I mean, the tools that I've written, there's always, they don't necessarily introduce features that weren't available to you before. They've just made it a lot easier. I mean, I've been writing code for a long time and working with PowerShell for a very long time, and I just could not get my head around Vim automation PowerShell module. It was one of the most complicated and difficult things um, that I ever had to use, and we struggled a lot with trying to develop scripts that were sort of robust and reliable and not, hundreds and hundreds of pages long
Right, right, right.
with that particular module. So um, part of how, I guess the story of how that PowerShell module came about was that I needed to write a self-service activation portal. I talked about, users being able to set their own passwords when they join the organization, and that functionality doesn't exist in Vim today. So we had to write a self-service activation portal, and to do that, again, performance was really, really important. I couldn't really use the libraries that were available there. So I ended up having to learn the SOAP mechanism behind the Vim service web service
Hmm.
itself. And through that process, I started getting a better understanding of how it all worked, and I wrote a client library around that. And it started making sense about what Vim Automation was trying to do, and Vim Automation was really a front end to the web service. It was a PowerShell interface to the web service, where as an engineer, as an administrator, what I thought I needed was I didn't care that there was a web service there or that there were these had to make import changes or whatever it was. I just needed to modify an attribute value, and that was a really, really difficult task to do. Required lots of script. So the PowerShell module came about with that in mind, is to get an object should be one line. To save an object, or say a change of value should be a couple of lines, not 10, 15, 20 lines of code. So removing some of that complexity and difficulty around that, and the barrier of entry really lowered, and certainly within my own team, we started doing some amazing things with the Vim service and the PowerShell, because we weren't fighting, with the web service, trying to match the concept of identity with the web service with PowerShell concepts, and cobble something together that works. So that's sort of how that whole thing came about.
Right, and I mean maybe just to emphasize the low barrier to entry of learning your PowerShell modules is that I think the first time that I ever took a crack at it, I think it maybe took me 30 minutes after, downloading it from GitHub, looking at the documentation. I was able to write a pretty quick script to update a custom portal object from a CSV file, and it was very simple to do. Where I mean, I don't know how long it would have taken me to do in the old Microsoft script. So yeah, it's one of those that it certainly made my life a lot easier. And so maybe with that in mind, what other success stories have you heard from the people that have downloaded the PowerShell tools from GitHub? What are some of the other success stories out there that stand out to you?
Yeah, there's been quite a few, and I think a lot of them come particularly around, not just speed of writing scripts, but the speed of the tool itself. So I previously used to criticize Vim Service a lot for being quite slow, but it turns out it's not so much Vim Service, but Vim Automation that contributed to a lot of that as well. And again, the way it interacted with the Vim service. One of the important things when you're working with that Vim service is only ask it for the information you actually need to work with at
Hmm.
the time, and that's sort of one of the concepts that my PowerShell script works with. So I think one of my favorite stories was John Bryant had a script that went from something like 7 hours to 6 minutes,
Oh, wow.
just with out of the box, a huge, huge change there. Ike, who you interviewed on the last episode, he had one that went down from 12 hours to 30 minutes. So it's really, really good to see other people getting those benefits from them. Those 7 hours or 12 hours that you're waiting could be much better spent doing other things.
Yes.
Um, So yeah, that's good. That's the whole point of getting these tools out there, is so that people can save time and make their lives a bit easier.
So what for people that perhaps even maybe to take another step back, for people that are looking to learn PowerShell or to try to get the most out of it, what were some of the resources or classes, or how did you go about learning PowerShell, and what might be some tips and tricks for people that are looking to step up their PowerShell game? What would you suggest they do?
That's a very good question, actually. For me, the change to PowerShell was fairly natural because I had a fairly strong grounding in .NET, which PowerShell is based on. So looking at it, I could kind of see, the abstraction of the .NET framework that they had, and sort of join the dots there. So I never went through any formal sort of PowerShell training myself. But I certainly refer a lot in my process of learning. I think Stack Overflow is one of the great resources that we have these days, the ability to ask questions and have lots of quality answers. I think that's probably my go-to in a lot of the work that I do, both in PowerShell and in .NET. If I get stuck on something, that's sort of where I tend to search first.
So maybe to follow up on that, with your tools, you make this all look so easy, right? Your PowerShell is fantastic. The ACMA tools are incredible to see in action. But what are some technologies that you struggle with today, or that you're not so superhuman at, compared to, say, your PowerShell and Vim stuff? What are things that really kind of give you trouble now that you're struggling with?
Um, I'm still learning a lot in the authentication space, particularly around cloud-based authentication, Azure identities, those kind of things. So I would say that's where my current gaps are, and we're looking at some solutions in that space at the moment. So filling some knowledge there. Thankfully, I have a very talented architect who does know a lot of that sort of stuff, and is leading that for us. But my focus has been so much on FIM and provisioning over the last sort of 2.5 years that we've been building this, that the authentication landscape has changed quite significantly.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I've fallen a bit behind there. So now that I've come out of the depths of provisioning, I'll be jumping back into that space and exploring OpenID Connect and things like that, and particularly how we can integrate those with provisioning.
Okay, that's interesting. So with that kind of in mind, then are you working on any other new or interesting projects, or what are anything kind of new and interesting that you have going on?
Yeah, so I'm currently doing some additions at the moment to the FIM service PowerShell to add localization support. So I've had a couple of people ask me for that, and offer to help me out with that process. That's kind of been one of my knowledge gaps as well. We haven't had the need to localize the FIM portal, so it wasn't something that I was ever able to get my head around. So I've had some people dedicate some time to giving me some training in that space and how they work with it to get my head around the concept, because it's still a little bit confusing for me there. So that's hopefully something that's coming out quite soon. And got a couple of ideas. So recently I released a PowerShell for the FIM sync engine, and behind that is a library that interfaces with the FIM sync engine. There's a lot of potential in there for other tools that I've got some ideas on. I'd love to see things like, web-based access to the sync engine, or mobile app-based access to the sync engine. So there's sort of some of the ideas I've got there. There is a project that's in a private beta at the moment to automate the run profiles of the synchronization engine. So taking some of the thinking and complexity around that, and allowing it to be automated. There's if you think about the way the sync engine works, you do an import, and if there are changes, then you do a synchronization, and that might make pending exports in other MAs. And so you export those, you do a confirming import. If there are changes again, you do another synchronization, and that's basically the same pattern that happens everywhere. So we have to write scripts to do all this. Perhaps the sync engine could do it itself, and we can just tell it when to do imports. So that's kind of the philosophy around this particular tool.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting my hands on that as well, since I signed up for the beta program. And as we kind of mentioned before, I think that that's a big gap with MIM and FIM, that there's no out of the box scheduler, if you will. You get the system installed, but then it's like, okay, well, how do I get this thing to actually do something, with that?
Yeah.
So I think
Where's the green go button?
exactly, you've got
Yeah.
they give you the engine block, but there's no starter key for it. So
Yes.
it'll be interesting to see um, how that all plays out. So, okay, well, very cool. More good stuff to look forward to. So, I guess let me take a look and see what we've got coming up as far as more questions for you. What is the coolest thing you've ever done with MIM or FIM outside of your LiftNet projects and ACMA? I'll take ACMA away from you as well, so you have to come up with an original answer.
So probably our self-service account activation system. So one of the things that I was always very careful about was performance of the FIM service, and I knew there were a lot of limitations there, and you have to be quite careful about the design to get that right, particularly in a large organisation. And when we were finally able to achieve 40,000 account registrations within 1 hour with that account activation system, that account activation system is just a front-end UI that talks to data in the FIM service. So that includes registering for SSPR and setting an initial password. So when we finally got our performance testing up to doing 40,000 account registrations in an hour, and I saw that the FIM service handled that very, very well, I think that was when I felt a lot of satisfaction with that. There was a lot of effort that went into that, and a lot of learning and understanding about how to make it work. But there was a huge number, and again, talked about our 10,000 students coming on in a day. That was sort of our minimum benchmark to get to, but to get to 40,000 gives us a lot of confidence that we can continue to grow in the future. So really pushing FIM to its limits and getting that sort of throughput was probably one of the coolest things that I've seen.
That sounds very neat. Very neat. Let's see. So, what would you say maybe 2 or 3 things every good MIM or FIM developer should know?
Um, I think defining your business rules is the most important thing before you get hands-on with anything. Spend as much time as possible as you can up front with that particular topic. The more you invest in getting those business rules right, the more success you're going to have. In my video from when I presented at Microsoft Ignite last year, I talked a lot about getting that right, and in particularly understanding the 4 identity data operations and what you can do around them. So we talk about transferring data, transforming data, creating new information, acting on that information, and all that is tied together by the business rules. So I encourage anyone to watch that video, and I think it's really, really worth that upfront investment in getting that right. Using the right tool for the right job, is the other lesson from that one there. But also keeping it quite simple. I mean, we have some very, very complicated business rules, but we really distill them down to, very small units, as small as possible as we can deal with, because it makes it a lot easier to test. We don't try and test, ACMA has a unit testing engine, which makes things really, really easy for us. But the key thing around there is design in really small pieces, not in big features, and test to those small features as well. We'll get much better results than focusing on the big picture, testing the big picture. You'll find a lot will probably go unresolved, and there'll be issues there.
Well said. Well said. Let's see. What are 2 or 3 features besides a scheduler that you would like to see added to MIM?
I think more customization of the FIM portal. The limitations there really hurt us sometimes.
Yes.
We've had really good responses from the product team in getting little things tweaked and features added in. But I think overall it's still something that you're designing around, and a user interface should be primarily, I think, about the user and the user's experience, where at the moment I think that has to come secondary to sort of the limited capabilities of the FIM portal. We in the identity management system, we don't just have data and attributes, but those attributes often have relationships with other pieces of data and other attributes. but it's very, very difficult to exploit those sort of relationships in there, in the FIM portal today. As an example, we're currently considering for our group management is actually building a custom UI, because it's we're just running up against some limitations that are really going to hurt that user experience.
Yeah.
So we're seeing what we can do, to have to get to that point. Kind of says we need a bit more flexibility there. I think the other one, admin-based password reset. So we've got our self-service password reset scenarios, but having administrator-based password reset would be, absolutely. It strikes me as interesting that it's missing.
And when you say administrator, you're talking, say, someone on behalf of the end user going in and changing their password for them via the FIM portal.
Yeah, exactly. So service desk, or I've forgotten my password, but I haven't registered for SSPR, or I've got a new phone number and I didn't bother changing my my mobile number in the SSPR registration. So we still have a lot of those sorts of scenarios pop up, and at the moment, particularly because we're multi-country, we have to set up sort of remote desktop servers, and for people to access AD users and computers console and things like that. And it just seems to be odd that it's in a completely different system when all those same people are all doing their identity management from inside the FIM portal. So
Right.
I think it'd be sorry. Yep.
Yeah, I don't really understand how that use case didn't make it in either. Written kind of rolled my own on providing interfaces for help desk people to reset passwords from the FIM portal, but again, it's not necessarily, the FIM portal isn't necessarily an elegant solution around that. And yeah, that would be a great feature that I would love to see them add in the future, hopefully. So
Yeah, absolutely.
so what technologies outside of MIM and PowerShell and I guess authentication interest you currently?
Authentication is obviously where my focus is going, as I mentioned before. So I'm keen to get back into that realm. .NET in general, developing for me isn't really part of my day-to-day job. Most of my day-to-day job is meetings and more meetings.
Wow. Okay.
The team I manage look after, I guess, a lot of the end user platforms, so the desktop SOE, our file and print services, our workstation management, email, and of course identity. But it's the I guess the development stuff outside of the 9 to 5, where it's a bit of a hobby for me, I guess. So yeah, learning the new stuff that's coming out in new versions of C# and Visual Studio and those kind of things is always cool to see. I don't think I could be a developer full time. It's something I enjoy doing, but I think if it was my day-to-day job, I might get bored of it. So I'm pretty happy with that balance that I've got there at the moment.
All right. Let's see. Got a couple more for you here. What is the most recent technology book you've read, or any book? We'll make it easy.
Wow. I don't think I've read a book in recent memory. It's probably been about 5 or 6 years.
Oh, come on, Ryan. You're not reading?
I,
Come on.
no,
Say
I'm
something
not
for the
reading.
kids.
It would have been like a Stephen Hawking book or something like that on my shelf. I do sort of have an interest in physics, I guess. But that would have been the last book I read. It's been
You do
quite some time.
audiobooks. Have you tried audiobooks
Nope,
at all? Really?
nope. Well,
Okay. Oh, I'm a huge audiobook fan as well. So, okay. Well, that's interesting. So you're consumed by authentication, PowerShell, and C Sharp. So,
sounds pretty sad when you put it that way.
well, well, so we'll follow up this last sad question to kind of conclude the interview here. So, what was your favorite McDonald's menu item?
Ooh, I think the quarter pounder would
Okay.
have to be my favorite one.
Favorite milkshake flavor.
Definitely vanilla.
Okay. All right.
The others were terrible.
Okay.
But then again, after you work there for 8 years, it all kind of starts tasting the same.
I
You don't really want it anymore.
I know when I worked in high school, I worked at I don't know if they maybe they have did they have Chick-fil-A in Australia? Has that
No,
been
we don't.
okay?
No.
But anyways, it's like chicken sandwich place here in the States is
hmm
probably the best way to describe it, and they've been wildly popular. But I worked there in high school. It was my evening job, and once I got out of that place, I didn't eat chicken for like the next 3 years. I couldn't look at chicken, didn't want to touch it, didn't want to, actually did not go to a Chick-fil-A, which they're actually really good, but I didn't go to a Chick-fil-A again until my first child was born. And that was probably, I mean, it probably was like 10 or 15 years before I even ate Chick-fil-A afterwards.
Wow.
So and now we're there a lot with the kids. That's all I hear is Chick-fil-A or whatever. So yeah, I feel your pain on that. So okay, well, we both escaped the clutches of fast food and fell into
Indeed.
the frying pan of Mim. So so well, all right, well, good, good. Well, so Ryan, I guess in closing, how can the listeners keep in touch with you and find out what you're up to?
So I'm pretty active on Twitter. So my handle there is Ryan L Newington, and you can also keep up with me on my blog, blog.lithiumblue.com. There's as Scott pointed out in the conversation we had last time, there's not that many posts there lately, but I did post one just because Scott. You made me feel bad the other day when you mentioned it, so there's a new one up there now. But the blog tends to be focused, I think, on larger sort of solution-based things that don't really fit in tweets.
Sure.
But if you want to keep up to date with what's happening with the updates to the FIM tools and the Powershell and those kind of things, then Twitter's the best place to get that information from.
Perfect, perfect. And also just want to throw a reminder in there for everyone to visit github.com/lithnet to see all the great tools that Ryan has got out there. So I would encourage everyone to give it a go and keep your hair from turning prematurely gray when working with them. So again, thanks for all the great work on those tools, Ryan, in between all your meetings. So all right, well, hey, it has been a pleasure catching up with you, Ryan, and we look forward to seeing all the great stuff that you'll be releasing soon, okay?
Thanks very much, Scott. Thanks for having me.